You know, the only reason people stood up for members of the House of Justice was out of to show their love and respect for the institution. There's no other reason. And I'm not a member of the institution any longer. We stood up last night for that incredible address by the counselor because we were pulled up by our hearts. We couldn't. Well, yes, I would be astounded if we didn't have to do something like that. Having walked down 10 flights of stairs because the space vehicles in the lobby were otherwise engaged, as one whose relationship with technology of any kind is one of the deepest hostility, surprised that it doesn't work, that the microphone doesn't work, nobody can find the light switch. Well, the only consolation, friends, is that we, God willing, are all going to heaven, and yet all of it is going to hell. Nothing it or its creators can do about that. Now, I'd like to feel that we're done. Exhausting. You know, anniversaries have always figured prominent. We're very late, and I'm going to barrel through this talk. I don't have any option, as fast as I can, and I can speak pretty rapidly. So. In the life of the Baha'i community, Shoghi Effendi, as you know, organized many of its most important communications around them. And apart from focusing our attention on the lives of the central figures, these anniversaries provide vantage points. Is that an echo? Vantage points from which you can gain a perspective on where we've come from and hopefully where we're going. And permit me to say, I don't wish to contradict about the 29th anniversary. This is the 29th conference, but the Association of Baha'i Studies was formed 30 years ago, so this is a wonderful, nice, round figure to be celebrating here. It goes without saying, or it ought to, that intellectual leadership was from the very beginning one that the revolutionary message of the Bab brought significantly the greatest response from his country's most searching and committed minds in the intellectual class of Iran. Similarly, the vast body of Baha'u'llah's writings laid out a vision of a global society way beyond the imagination of his contemporaries. And Abdu'l-Baha's magisterial secret of divine civilization provided for the unheeding people of his country a reality check, which the subsequent 125 years of unrelieved social, moral, intellectual, economic ruin is at last beginning to awaken them. And of course, since then, distinguished figures like Mirza Bafaz, Ishraq Khavari, Ali Murad Dawoodi, and so on, quite a number of others. Very different was the intellectual life of the Baha'i communities in the West. To them, and particularly the Canadian and American Baha'i believers, the center of the covenant entrusted the executorship of the divine plan, and the guardian called on them to across the whole face of the planet, the creation and consolidation of this complex of administrative institutions that's serving as a nucleus and very patterned, in the Guardian's words, of Baha'u'llah's world order, the erection of the Mother Temple of the West and its other temples subsequently, devising of means for the public proclamation of the cause and the vindication of its independence in the Baha'i community in the cradle of the faith against persecution. And in all of this, the Baha'i community was stunningly successful. There is nothing remotely like it in history and on the face of the planet. Patience is... in the words of this document, One Common Faith, just released by the Baha'i World Center, by the Universal House of Justice, I just want to read you what they say, if I can make it out in the dim light up here. As it enters the 21st century, the Baha'i cause is the Baha'i community today comprises several million people, representative of virtually every ethnic, cultural, and social and religious background on earth, administering their collective affairs without the intervention of clergy through democratically elected councils. The many thousands of localities in which it has put down its roots are to be found in every country, territory, and significant island group. Constitute the most diverse and geographically widespread of any organized body of people on the planet, is unlikely to be challenged by anyone familiar with the evidence. That is what history required. That is what history required of us. That is what the world desperately needed, and that is what precisely what we have done and what we are going to go on doing, and absolutely nothing on the face of the planet will stop it. And clearly this vast collective effort required intense intellectual activity, a unique kind of intellectual awareness, and an extraordinary capacity to harness intellectual, all of which brings us to our own association. And as you've been told, as you all know, its conception arose from consultation and a goal given to the Baha'i community of Canada by the Universal House of Justice in Rizwan, 1974, and to begin introducing courses on the Baha'i faith in universities. In January 75, proceed, and that was out of that the proposal for an association of this kind emerged. The National Assembly adopted it. Its sister assemblies in the United States and Alaska enthusiastically joined their support. It's not my purpose here to review the development, but the achievement does call on us for at least some passing. Probably there'll be all kinds of papers written on this subject, and so I don't need to go into details, but the fact that there are today, I've lost track, someplace between 25 and 30 affiliate associations around the world. There's a whole wealth of learned articles, books, and so on, which enrich the intellectual life of the Baha'i community. There are conferences like this that open want to join, and of course there are courses on the Baha'i faith, and have been for some time now, in various universities on this continent and in Europe. What I want to draw our attention to is the impact of this process on the consciousness of the Baha'i community. On the one hand, it reinforces our respect for what Baha'u'llah has called the possession, so egalitarian that we don't recognize that God has endowed certain people with talents and capacities, much less that they have willingly made the sacrifices to put these at the service of the cause and the community, and we welcome that. And these conferences are an opportunity to experience it at first hand. But also, these activities The age of a privileged clergy is gone, obviously never to return, and all the signs indicate that their modern ideological imitators face even swifter extinction. The 20th century showed that, and those who are still busy at it should be learning their lessons from that period of that crucial period of history. So, activity will increasingly be normal features of any Baha'i life that deserves the name, the word Baha'i. And the Baha'i community should feel confident that it is in the vanguard of this advancing process of the civilizing of human nature, of the democratization of learning. Now, in the 1990s, opportunities for this work. And so in the fall, sometime of 1994, a great deal of interest was aroused in the Baha'i community by the announcement of an American then Baha'i academic that he was creating a list, an internet list which he called Talisman, for the discussion of scholarly subjects. And in a relatively short time, I don't know how many, maybe from new translations of all kinds, learned commentary, and particularly an atmosphere that welcomed long, long overdue challenges to received Baha'i lore, the Kitabi hearsay that we had all been afflicted by. And this was being steadily dissolved. The venture's guiding star was to be the scientific spirit. Rigorous ethical demands on those participating. This was the cause of truth, and it must lead wherever truth led. We Baha'is must follow. And in the early exchanges on that list, one cannot fail to be impressed, more than impressed, deeply moved by the seriousness, the principle. Respect this spirit, to respect the spirit of inquiry, to respect the spirit of scientific rigor. And that commitment survived increasing evidence that there were undercurrents, political undercurrents, that created divisiveness, criticism, attempts to deconstruct the Baha'i community into total whatever, and equally artificial efforts to make some kind of a class distinction between what were termed, quote, scholars and administrators, the former being limited to the one narrow discipline or the two narrow disciplines of Islamic studies and religious studies, to the exclusion of all the rest of the scientific disciplines will increasingly bring to bear on Baha'u'llah's message, and the latter, the so-called administrators, ignoring completely the nature of Baha'i institutions, in which then it's like a flow of water in and out according to the processes of election and appointment. There are no such people as administrators, and it's obvious to anybody who is sincere that there are no such. Not to be, and anyone who sees his identity as an administrator is headed for a very severe disappointment. Soon key passages in the Guardian's rendering of Baha'i texts were deliberately translated, in a way that left little room and implied little need for the institution that he embodied. Ultimately, participants of exploring scientifically a religious system in which they were explicitly forbidden to discuss that system's central and distinguishing feature. It's like an episode of Monty Python, that you could that you could take seriously this kind of activity. We're not concerned here with or even deliberate mischief. These are concerns for the individual conscience, and if necessary, obviously, for the institutions of the faith. Our concern here is with the requirements of scholarship. And clearly the talisman scheme was a flagrant violation of these standards, corrupt and deeply corrupting, one that would not have been in the world. Now, where all this might eventually have led is difficult, fortunately, to imagine, and in the event, the whole excursion ended abruptly one morning in February 1996, when the list owner, perhaps fatigued by marking papers or whatever he was engaged in, made the fatal, irretrievable error intended only for a small group of his own collaborators who rejoiced in the name Majnun, which means, of course, crazy. The choice was theirs, not mine. So, within a few hours, depending on time zones, several score Baha'is who until that moment honestly believed they were engaged with and scientific research awoke to the realization that they were in fact dupes. They were dupes of a totally cynical and very sophisticated scheme of intellectual manipulation, a kind of scholarly confidence scam. For the Majnun group, the talisman discussions had served merely as a vehicle for the clandestine promotion seemed on the outside to be independent reflections exchanged among their scholarly members, emerged in fact as carefully orchestrated argumentation designed to shape the forum's thinking. As luck would have it, the message that slipped also exposed all of the methods that they planned to use. That Majnun and its talisman system was designed to follow in the footsteps of the totally discredited and pitiful figure of Mirza Ahmad Sohrab. Now, the complacent amorality of the scheme was breathtaking, and obviously the don't minimize that for a moment. So I don't want to diminish the seriousness of these features, but rather I want to focus on the aspect of the episode that concerns us and concerns the topic we're talking about here. For all or most of the actual leaders, for all or most of the participants, I should say, in Talisman, was simply fatally damaged. Counselors intervened. Most of the leading members departed from the faith. Some remain in it, very quiet. And but that side of the situation was taken care of by the institutions. The fiasco has left several. It left a detritus in the form of a vast archive of tendentious argumentation, dubious or deliberately inaccurate translations, and scurrilous denigration of all who disagreed with the Majnun leadership. And that's obviously going to run the risk of misleading at least some unwary non-Baha'i researchers as to the nature of Baha'u'llah's message. Of the ideological shadows lurking on the periphery of their activities and are probably not going to be seriously misled by it. And this is the important thing, none of this has in any way undermined the Baha'i community's commitment to the life of the mind. On the contrary. and important and often obscure issues of the faith candidly explored, discussed, completely freely, and this is the point, without any inhibiting restraint whatever from Baha'i administrative institutions. And I repeat, without the least inhibition from Baha'i administrative institutions. And on the contrary, the House of Justice took a role only when the whole thing had been exposed and certain actions had to be taken with respect to those responsible. We'll never know how many unspoken questions, unacknowledged misgivings, secret misgivings and concerns were dissolved by this incredible experience that understanding what Abdu'l-Baha said, and I've got a moment, I'm going to read you from Secret of Divine Civilization, page 33-34. He says, For everything, God has created a sign and symbol and established standards and tests by which it may be known. And outward perfections. They must possess a good character, an enlightened nature, a pure intent, as well as intellectual power, brilliance, discernment, and so on. And he says, whoever is lacking in these divine qualifications and does not demonstrate these inescapable requirements in his own life should not for the community. Well, now, in the past, such enterprises as Majnun had almost without exception succeeded. They had succeeded in people who had certain prized skills and abilities, privileged elites who possessed these resources, were able to seize people, religious people, and to insert into the heart of successive faiths what the one common faith message refers to as an authority parallel with and even inimical in spirit to the revealed teachings on which the tradition was based, a kind of competing hegemony. And to maintain this mankind literally for centuries. And this is the point, that authority that was drawn on to accomplish this was an authority that was borrowed from transient conceptions of the time, centuries ago, Gnosticism or Mithraism or whatever it happened to be. Parenthetically, of course, the Majnun conceptual and liberal political agenda that was widely prevalent in the concluding decades of the 20th century and that is now under increasing attack, not from the Baha'i community, God knows, but from other segments of the intellectual world who are disabused of the postulates involved. The Baha'u'llah's covenant has benefits of the talisman experience has been its demonstration through the power of the covenant of the radically new level of consciousness on which humanity has now entered, spiritually, morally, and intellectually. It's demonstrated, this experience has demonstrated that access to the privileged minority, and that it is founded on the revealed truth, which you find right at the beginning of Gleanings. So would somebody please turn that cell phone off? We were supposed to tell you that at the beginning, I think. I've got a cell phone. It doesn't work at all, so I don't ever have to worry. In fact, I was up in my room when I arrived here. To my no sound at all. I was desperately anxious to get in touch with a couple of my friends, but I couldn't. And then I remembered that some friends in Toronto had persuaded me to buy a cell phone. They bought it for me, and I had it, and they had written out all the instructions and so on, and it was charged up to the limit of its tiny little mind. And I thought, aha, this is my opportunity. I looked up, and I took out my cell phone, and it didn't work. And I had been told it was the coolest cell phone available today. I had bought it because it was narrow. It wasn't like a metal baked potato. It was a little narrow thing you slipped in your pocket. They told me it was very, very cool. Regardless, I was not able. With the elevators, however, were working, so I didn't have a problem with that respect. I can't resist this. To have the chance at a microphone to say what I really feel about technology. But I honestly believe that through prayer, meditation, consultation, and collective it won't be in my lifetime, I understand that. And I hope I will see it from wherever I am and laugh. Now, it seems to me ironic that just as the talisman venture was imploding, an entirely new stage in the process of Baha'i learning was opening. And most particularly, the Ruhi Institute that had been conceived and shaped through the struggle and the suffering and the sacrifices of the peoples of Latin America, peoples of Bolivia and Ecuador and Colombia and so on. That's quite that should trigger quite something in our or the United States or Europe. It was devised in that part of the world, and we can confidently look outside this continent. We've done the main part of our job, after all. We've done, as executors of the divine plan, what we were asked to do. And of course, we'll go on serving. We've got all kinds of other things ahead of us. But we can feel confident now that other communities, very big capacities often very different from our own. And they will shape the cause. They will come up with devices and so on. The regional councils didn't originate in Massachusetts or Manitoba. They originated in India. And we will see that go on. We should be prepared. We should welcome it. We've worked, God knows we've worked for it. We've spent a heck of a lot of money, a lot of people. The regional councils and the Ruhi Institute are the first wave of that payback that we will be able to participate in. It would be no exaggeration to say that the impact of the Ruhi Institute on the intellectual life of the Baha'i community is truly revolutionary. From virtue that the process has awakened in both individuals and communities a vitality, an intellectual as well as spiritual vitality, reminiscent of the energy that introduced the faith into these regions decades ago. So back alive. It's like, I've never seen it, but I know in Canada, I'm sure in the States too, we're told that forest people are broken-hearted to see their favorite trees destroyed, and then before you know it, little green shoots begin to come up in this wilderness of cinders, and the forest begins to restore itself. And that is obviously the way of the faith. It's the new stage that we have entered is also by a clarity of mind that expresses itself in a desire for purposeful social action. I was going to talk a good deal more about this. It would be totally unnecessary for me to do so after that brilliant address we heard last night from Councillor Birkeland. I hope he's not in the room, or if he is in I can honestly state that I have never heard so clear, so cogent, so perceptive a presentation of the very essence of the Institute process and its core activities as we were privileged to hear last night. And I am immensely grateful that I was present on this occasion. I assume the address has been recorded. It captures in only a very short space of time, it captures the essence of what we're engaged in. So I don't have to repeat what he said. But in the words of Abdu'l-Bahá's, again, that great treatise that he wrote to the Iranian people 125 years ago, he says, the nature and the purpose of learning. The whole population should be protected in every way. Every effort should be exerted to adopt a combination of all possible measures to raise up the Word of God, increase the number of believers, promote the faith of God, and exalt it. And this, of course, is exactly what is occurring. This as the new cycles, because the Ruhi Institute, of course, operates in cycles, and we're coming to the end of one of these great cycles. Another one will follow, and another one will follow that. And these will assist the individual who has been awakened spiritually and intellectually, who is living in the creative word, will assist him to make the connection between collectivities of any kind, the Baha'i community itself, the clusters, and then society as a whole. And then ultimately an understanding of the covenant, and then the preparation for actions that serve the humanitarian needs of humankind. It is thrilling. It's a mind-boggling enterprise that has been set in motion. And again, Latin America, out of terrible suffering, people who could not even safely walk to a cluster meeting without being in fear of their lives, who didn't have money, who didn't have any transportation. They walked because they had no other way to walk. But it was out of that, or with patient development, that this marvelous system arose. And all these remarks I'm making are totally personal. This is my personal view. And I hope, probably it's not necessary with a Baha'i audience like this, but I hope no individual in the audience will connect what I have to say in any way with the Universal House of Justice. If it wants to say something, it says it in black and white in English. It's translated into all the languages. It's communicated. Secret knowledge that only those few people whose brains are wired strongly enough to bear it are able to cope with. Open to the whole cause is open to all of its members. Obviously there are personal things that assemblies are counseling people on. That's a different matter. Or the legal and until those are complete, obviously there has to be a degree of confidentiality. But so far as the basic cause is concerned, the teachings, the fundamental beliefs, that's available for all of us. There's no special privileged knowledge that certain people have. So please don't connect any comments that I make with the House of Justice. These are my own views entirely. And I want to say that for me, because I tend to look at everything historically. You know, the French, I want it's safe to mention the French in the United States, I guess. I'll just barrel right on anyway. Every language has its special gifts, and French you can say things in French that you can't say in English or any other language. The mind is formé. And if you're educated in the arts or in history or in physics or music or whatever it happens to be, or I suppose one has to believe, one has to suspend misbelief, computer technology perhaps, for all I know, your mind is formed that way and you see everything that way. So I tend to see everything historically. Its tremendous success throughout the planet is that it has thrown, you know, in the jungle, if you're going to build a bridge, I haven't built a bridge in the jungle, but I have been there and I've been told all about it. The first thing they do is throw a line across the chasm. One line is thrown across, and it's secured at the other end, and that line makes possible pass across that bridge for years and years, and decades for that matter. That is what, to me, the Ruhi Institute has done. It has thrown a line across what we thought was the unbridgeable chasm between mind and heart, between faith and reason, that has afflicted the Western world for the past 500 years. And on that line, we will be able to cross back and forth, in which the chasm will cease to be of any significance, because the chasm exists only in our minds, no place else. And I think the other thing that will result inevitably from that, and we should take this mighty enterprise that we're engaged in, this intellectual enterprise, this civilizing of human nature, will increasingly call on the best that scientific and scholarly research can offer. We're not going to accomplish this just with prayer and meditation and reflection on the writings in children's classes and so on. Trained minds and spirits can contribute. And the cause will provide the decision-making processes by which those contributions can be focused where the need exists, and the cause will provide the financial resources. You know, there's no problem with any democratic government in the Western world from understanding in France, everyone understands. It's applying it, it's persuading different segments of the population that this needs to be done. That is the real challenge. Scientists and scholars must, many of them, stand in deep despair sometimes to see they offer to the decision makers, they offer the best that the mind, not because of any ill will, not because we're ruled by wicked people, or even necessarily all that selfish people, but simply because we do not have a system that permits humanity collectively to function, in the words of Baha'u'llah, as one soul in one body, to assess those opportunities and to accept them, and then to that to hear this extraordinary Ruhi program and the core activities that are related to it, challenged on the grounds that its insights and methodology are suited only to Bolivian peasants, and I've heard that, strikes me as merely a damning and willfully ignorant about both human nature and the course of human history. Further comment seems superfluous. Well, I have reviewed in these remarks, and I fear all too briefly, three phenomena that shaped the life of the mind of the Baha'i community over the past few decades. This one, to awaken believers in a wide range of countries to opportunities represented by serious scholarship. The fact that this huge crowd is in this room, and you go to Europe, you go to the Far East, you go to India, you find the same thing. Intensely desiring to understand, intensely desiring knowledge. Larger and larger and larger audiences. I don't know how many there are in the room, 1,600, 1,800, whatever number of people there are in the room. It would have been 300 or 200. I can remember I was on that group of 30 years ago when it was about, we'd hit 42. And everybody was just ecstatic. I mean, the kingdom of heaven was just is multiplying. And of course, institutions of higher learning will follow. And secondly, I've mentioned the impressive success of our community in deflecting an organized attempt to impose on its intellectual life the same kind of elitist control that characterized religion's past. Obviously that, but I gather they're pretty bad spirits, and they're lurking there in the shadows, waiting to hurl themselves on us again. So we have not heard the last word from them, nor will our children, nor will our grandchildren. They'll be finding new devices to pursue the same goals, because the goal is to reassert elitist control. The goal. They didn't call themselves clergy at the beginning. They said, no, we're not priests. We don't have any sacerdotal functions. We are ulama. We are the learned. Well, you know where that went, with the turbans and the nightgowns and so on, and bank accounts in Switzerland. Well, the same. That is sort of a bad gene that we've got. Minds and hearts. Gradually, it didn't get here in a generation. It will take generations to have it combed out. So the Guardian warns us that covenant breaking and attacks on the faith from in and without will continue. And that's as it should be, because it strengthens us. Abdul Baha said, it's like the winds that make the roots of a tree solid. A major test. I don't say it's anything like what lies ahead, but nevertheless, for where we were, this was a fairly severe one, because it always can bring the credit or the authority of money or position or so on to bear, and this has to be dissipated gradually. More important than this, even this defense of the faith, has been the emergence of a worldwide program of learning that is putting in place the first stones of the universal education system that will realize Baha'u'llah's vision, that Baha'u'llah intends for his community. And we are seeing that today. Finally, I think that the experience of these past decades underlines a consideration of crucial importance. To me, a distressing and really embarrassing feature of much of contemporary exchange among Baha'i scholars in our part of the world is the fact that they are almost unblinkingly Western in origin. And alas, I'm afraid, to some extent, some Baha'i scholars are inclined the same thing. The talisman episode for me illustrates what is at stake in this situation. Although I can't claim to have read extensively the internet exchanges involved, because there was masses and masses of stuff, but some excerpts were shared. Revealing, striking to realize that the horizons of the Majnun group had at no point extended beyond the boundaries of the United States. At no point had this discussion extended beyond the boundaries of this one national context. I asked a research assistant who knew all about computers and so on to do a search for me. And what she pointed out to me when she finished was that in the flood of Majnun postings that expatiated exhaustively on such subjects as, all of this in quotations, liberalism, democracy, justice, reform, and enlightenment, what was conspicuous. They simply figured not at all, even tangentially, in the reflections of a group of people who professed a consuming interest in a body of scripture that revolves around the principle that the earth is one country and mankind its citizens. It was simply breathtaking that this Islamic themes that were endlessly rehearsed and appealed to in various highly arcane discussions appear in perspective as little more than buttresses and garnishment for a blindly liberal and relativist ideological and political agenda. I'm prepared to believe in the possibility that Shia theology may have some modest contribution to make to the challenge of creating a global civilization. I'm prepared to suspend disbelief, I'm sure, and it'll be appropriately footnoted when and if that actually happens. But no rational person living in the opening decade that will be brought to this immense collective enterprise by masses of people in other parts of the world who achieve their insights along with learning, along with study, who achieve their insights through very great suffering, very great privation. People who have thrown off the dead weight of centuries of the past. People who today are at the very forefront of the technological and scientific and economic revolution that is transforming the whole planet. People who probably, if we ask them, also have considerable experience to share in dealing with ideological. Well, now, that is the real world. When Bahá'í was here in this country, when he was in Greenacre, he spoke about reality. He urged us to examine reality. He said, this is an arena for struggle, for sacrifice. This is not a place for play and pastimes. Those who want that struggle, come, come, come. As Baha'u'llah had said before him, the others leave. The world that the Baha'i community understands and is serving very effectively in the only way that we can, because we didn't get in the condition that we're in overnight. We got in the condition that we're in over centuries. And it will take a long period of time for humanity to emerge from this darkness, but the process has begun. sounds very irritating to its opponents, is the fact that we proceed to announce exactly what we're planning to do 5 years ahead of time or 9 years ahead of time, and then go ahead and do it. No, nobody else, and most conspicuously, I guess I should say, the Soviet Union ever managed that. And that, I suggest to you, is in the Baha'i community. Thank you.